Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Ukraine's president says talks with Russia will resume after a pretty good first day, even as Kiev is rocked by a series of powerful explosions. Tens of millions are under lockdown across China as surging virus cases return mass tests and hazmat-suited health officials to city streets on a scale not seen since the start of the pandemic.
Innocent people.
And police are conducting an urgent manhunt for a gunman suspected of shooting homeless men on the streets of Washington and New York in a series of cold-blooded attacks. And people attend an immersive exhibition dedicated to a Ukrainian artist, poet, and philosopher, Taras Shevchenko, in Toronto.
Literary language did not exist at that.
First in our news, a series of powerful explosions rocked residential districts of Kiev early Tuesday, killing 4 people now, just hours before talks between Ukraine and Russia were set to resume. At least 3 large blasts were heard from the center of the capital, sending columns of smoke high into the sky. As dawn broke, the damage became clear, with one strike hitting a large 16-story housing block. The bodies of 4 people were recovered, 27 were rescued, that according to Ukraine's emergency service. Another residential building in the Podilsk area also came under attack. The capital, Kiev, is surrounded to the north and east, and nearly half its population of 3 million people have fled. Only roads to the south remain open, according to city authorities, who have set up checkpoints, and residents are stockpiling food and medicine. The United Nations estimates almost 2.8 million people have already fled Ukraine, and some 636 civilian deaths have been recorded, including dozens of children, and the true toll is likely far much higher. Meanwhile, just hours earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, wearing his now signature military green crew neck, issued a new video address sounding a note of cautious optimism about the ongoing peace talks. He also claimed Russia was beginning to realize victory would not come on the battlefield. Let's take a look.
Потрібно триматись, потрібно боротись, щоб перемогти, щоб пройти до заслуженого українцями миру, чесного миру, з гарантіями безпеки для нашої держави, для наших людей. І щоб покласти це на папір. У переговорах, складних переговорах, сьогодні вже почалась відеозустріч делегацій. Вона триває, всі чекають новин ввечері. Ввечері обов'язково доповімо.
Markushin. Meanwhile, the mayor of Irpin, Alexander Markushin, announced that no journalist will be let into Irpin until the area is liberated from the Russians. Markushin claims that the stream of media content from Irpin helps reveal military positions to the Russians, and said the measure is to prevent risking more Ukrainian lives. Take a look.
Маркушин звертаюся до наших ЗМІ, до іностранних ЗМІ і дуже вас прошу, тимчасово, на період звільнення нашого міста, з Романовки не переходить міст, не фотографувати позиції наших військових, не фотографувати їхні обличчя. Це шкодить для звільнення, для повного звільнення нашого міста. З завтрашнього дня.
Now, this announcement comes a day after U.S. journalist Brent Renaud was shot dead and another wounded in the frontline suburb of Kiev, which has witnessed some of the fiercest fighting since Russia invaded Ukraine. Meanwhile, China's foreign minister said his country is not a party to the crisis, still less wants to be affected by the sanctions in a call with his Spanish counterpart. On Sunday, Washington expressed concern about alignment between Russia and China after marathon talks between U.S. and Chinese officials. Reports suggest that Moscow is seeking military and economic support from Beijing. While declining to directly address the reports, China has accused Washington of spreading disinformation about its role in the conflict. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Washington is warning China of significant consequences if they provide assistance to Russia in Ukraine during a meeting between high-ranking U.S. and Chinese officials on the Ukraine war and other security issues. Take a look.
I think what we have conveyed and what was conveyed by our national security advisor in this meeting is that should they provide military or other assistance that, of course, violates sanctions or supports the war effort, that there will be significant consequences. But in terms of what those specifics look like, we would coordinate with our partners and allies to make that determination.
According to the New York Times, citing unnamed U.S. officials, Moscow also asked Beijing for economic assistance, but there were no details on the request or whether China had responded. China has so far sent mixed signals on Russia's bloody invasion. Beijing does not back Western sanctions, but Washington hopes the giant Chinese economy will at least not attempt to rescue Russia from potential default or send weaponry. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian told journalists on Monday that China had played a constructive role in urging peace and calling for negotiations. And stung by criticism of its lackluster approach to refugees fleeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United Kingdom unveiled a new scheme to allow refugees to stay with Britons for up to 3 years. Here's Patricia Rodriguez for the details.
UK on Sunday unveiled a new scheme to allow refugees fleeing the Ukraine-Russian war to stay with Britons for up to 3 years. The Homes for Ukraine program will allow tens of thousands to gain access to work, healthcare, and education, Cabinet Secretary Michael Gove said. Some 3,000 have already been given visas to join Ukrainian relatives living in Britain under an existing family scheme. With the new scheme, the government wanted to try to ensure that every available home is opened up to those who are fleeing persecution. Hosts will be given £350 a month and must commit to a minimum stay of 6 months. They must sponsor a named Ukrainian who Gove said could be someone Britons have met on social media or with churches and charities playing an intermediary role. Britons will need to undergo security vetting, especially to protect vulnerable women and children from Ukraine. The refugees themselves will still require a visa, although the government has simplified the process after a deluge of attacks last week over the complications it had thrown up to fleeing Ukrainians. Here's the announcement of Britain's Secretary of State for Local Communities, Michael Gove.
The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. Of course, we want to minimise bureaucracy and make the process as straightforward as possible, while also doing everything we can to ensure the safety of all involved. Sponsors will therefore be required to undergo necessary vetting checks, and we're also streamlining processes to security assess the status of all Ukrainians who will be arriving in the United Kingdom. The British people have already opened their hearts in so many ways. I'm hopeful that many will also be ready to open their homes and to help those fleeing persecution find peace, healing, and the prospect of a brighter future.
Gove said that a website for individual Britons to register as sponsors would launch on Monday, with the first arrivals possible in a week. The devolved governments of Scotland and Wales said that they were ready to act as super sponsors to bring in as many Ukrainians as possible and urged London to slash visa red tape. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Patricia Rodriguez. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's capital, Kiev, will impose a 36-hour curfew from Tuesday night amid a difficult and dangerous moment after several Russian strikes, according to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko in a video posted to his Telegram channel. Take a look.
Сьогодні складний і небезпечний момент. За рішенням військового командування від сьогодні, 15 березня, з 20:00 у Києві, запроваджується комендантська година. Заборона пересування містом без спецперепусток. Виходити можна тільки, щоб дойти до укриття. Комендантська година діятиме до 7 ранку 17 березня. Тому прошу всіх киян підготуватись до того, що 2 доби доведеться бути вдома або за сигналу тривоги в укритті.
And this announcement comes as Russia launches fresh attacks in Ukraine's capital, which has nearly been encircled by Moscow's troops in the third week of the invasion, and that has lost an estimated half of its 3.5 million pre-war population. Meanwhile, Russia has drawn up lists of 40,000 fighters from Syrian army and allied militia ranks to be put on standby for deployment in Ukraine. That, according to a war monitor reporting this today. The Kremlin said last week that volunteers, including from Syria, were welcome to fight alongside the Russian army in Ukraine. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said Russian officers, in coordination with the Syrian military and allied militia, had set up registration offices in regime-held areas. Rami Abdel Rahman, who heads the UK-based Monitor, which has a wide network of sources in Syria, said Russian officers deployed as part of the force Moscow sent to Syria in 2015 to support Damascus had approved 22,000 of them. In a country where soldiers earn between $15 and $35 per month, Russia has promised them a salary of $1,100 to fight in Ukraine, according to the observatory. They are also entitled to $7,700 in compensation for injuries and their families to $16,500 if they are killed in combat. However, a Syrian government representative denied the recruitment drive detailed by the observatory. Syrian mercenaries have already fought on opposing sides of foreign conflicts in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. UN Chief Antonio Gutierrez warned that the world must act to prevent a hurricane of hunger and a meltdown of global food system following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Secretary General told reporters in New York that the war risks sparking far-reaching consequences for the global food supply that will have a devastating impact on the poorest. Take a look.
This war goes far beyond Ukraine. It is also an assault on the world's most vulnerable people and countries. While war reigns over Ukraine, a sword of Damocles hangs over the global economy, especially in the developing world. Food, fuel, and fertilizer prices are skyrocketing. Supply chains are being disrupted, and the costs and delays of transportation of imported goods, when available, are at record levels. And all of this is hitting the poorest, the hardest, and planting the seeds for political instability and unrest around the globe. 45 African and least developed countries import at least 1/3 of their wheat from Ukraine and Russia. 18 of those countries import at least 50%. This includes countries like Burkina Faso, Egypt, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. We must do everything possible to avert a hurricane of hunger and the meltdown of the global food system. And with each passing hour, 2 things are increasingly clear. First, it keeps getting worse. Second, whatever the outcome, this war will have no winners, only losers.
The Secretary General was speaking on the sidelines of a briefing by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, to the Security Council. Finally, he said further escalation of the war, whether by accident or design, threatens all of humanity. In the last couple of weeks, Gutierrez said he has been in close contact with a number of countries, including China, France, Germany, India, Israel, and Turkey, working on mediation efforts to bring an end to this war. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked a protester who interrupted a Russian TV news with an anti-war poster. Take a look.
Я благодарен тем россиянам, которые не прекращают попыток донести правду. Тем, кто борется с дезинформацией и рассказывает правду, рассказывает реальные факты своим друзьям, своим близким, родным. И лично той девушке, которая вошла в студию Первого канала с плакатом «Против войны».
As you can see there, a dissenting employee had entered the studio during Russia's most watched evening news broadcast, holding up a poster saying "No war" and condemning Moscow's military action in Ukraine. Meanwhile, this video released by OVD Info, which monitors detentions at opposition protests, a woman identified as Marina Ovsyannikova said she works at Russia's Channel 1 as an editor and explains why she entered the studio Monday during Russia's most watched evening news broadcast, holding up a poster saying "No war" and condemning Moscow's military action in Ukraine. The incident was a highly unusual breach of security at the tightly controlled state broadcaster Channel 1. Its flagship 9 p.m. news show called Time has run since the Soviet era and is watched by millions around the country, particularly by older Russians. Meanwhile, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration said the deployment of overseas Filipino workers to Ukraine has been suspended due to tensions between the host country and Russia. Take a look.
Dahil po inaas na ng DFA ang alert level doon sa Ukraine, ito po ay alert level 4 na ng evacuation. At dahil po alert level 4 ng Ukraine, POA Governing Board ay naglabas naman po ng Miyerkules lamang GB Reso na nagsasabi meron pong depth ngayon sa Ukraine.
Ano po, noong 2014 pa, hindi na tayo nagpapa-deploy ng ating mga OFWs papunta ng Ukraine kasi po alert level 2 na ang Ukraine. Ano? Ang tanging OFWs lamang na nakakaalis doon ay yung mga tinatawag po nating returning workers o yung balik manggagawa. No? Ito pong 2021, wala po tayong returning workers doon. Pero nung last year, 2020, may 4 po. Nung nakaraang taon, noong 2019, may 12 po. Sila po yung mga domestic workers po natin at saka mga skilled and professional workers po. Hanggat may kaguluhan po, mananatili po ang alert level 4 dyan. Kaya kung magtatagal po yung kaguluhan dyan, magtatagal din po yung ating alert at gayon din po yung deployment ban. Ang challenge po natin ngayon, yung ating mga seafarers, na iiwan na lang po doon ay mga mahigit 200 na kasalukuyan pa po on board at inaasikaso natin kung paano natin sila ma-repatriate using yung humanitarian na corridor kung tawagin po.
Mr. Olalia said only a few OFWs are working in the European nation. He also said the government is also ready to assist the returning OFWs to get another job abroad, though through agency hires or direct hires. Meanwhile, the DFA, or the Department of Foreign Affairs, has welcomed 54 seafarers who arrived on Monday, the biggest group to come home so far since the start of evacuation and repatriation from the war-torn Ukraine. In a news release issued today, the DFA said the group consisted of 14 seafarers of MV Bolton Ithaki, 7 seafarers of MV Ithaca Prospect, 12 seafarers of MV Polar Star, and 21 seafarers of MV Riva Wind. The DFA, the Philippine Embassy in Budapest, headed by Ambassador Frank Simafranca and Philippine Honorary Consul Victor Gaina of Chisinau, Moldova, have been monitoring 23 ships that are manned by Filipinos in affected areas. 2 of these, including the Yasa Jupiter and MV Namura Queen, were both hit by shelling in the Black Sea and left a Filipino seafarer hurt. The latest arrival brings the total number of seafarers repatriated from Ukraine since February 27 to 247 seafarers, while 14 are still expected to arrive on March 15. And the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues to be felt around the world, even as far away as Hawaii, where there has been an outpouring of support to the Ukrainian people. Alfred Asenas from EBC Hawaii Pacific with more.
We are sympathetic of our neighbors, our people in Ukraine. We're encouraging our community and people of the world to pray.
I'm here as a concerned citizen, okay? Because what's going on is just so evil. We can't just stand back and do nothing. And if even so much as wearing Ukrainian colors and waving at people, that's doing something at least, maybe to raise consciousness.
Just a few moments, Honolulu Hale, which houses the office of the mayor and the city council, will light up with yellow and blue, representing the colors of the flag of the European country of Ukraine.
In our shared contempt for what's happened to the people of Ukraine, that Honolulu Hale will be lit in blue and yellow lights in support of the Ukrainian people. This is something that, you know, I've been on this planet since 1946, and this sort of predates my whole sense of the world, and something that sounds like it was happening in the 1930s. It's really absolutely hard to comprehend that this is going on. We can only pray for those people, and somehow, some way, through diplomacy or some other action, that this comes to an end, and comes to an end quickly.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mr. Bawal, may ibis ka, oh. Asan? It's a prank! Okay lang manakot. Pero kung mananakot ka para sa boto, bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, threats, intimidation, terrorism, use of fraudulent device or other forms of coercion is an election offense.
Sino kausap mo? Makaalis na nga, sa iba na lang ako mananakot. Mr. Pwede! Mr. Pwede! May malaking ibis sa likod mo! Nox! Babawi ka pa, ha? Di mo ako maiisahan! Ako si Mr. Bawal na nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pananakot para sa boto. Ibis! Hoy! Bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back. Nearly 30 million people were under lockdown across China today as surging virus cases prompted the return of mass tests and hazmat-suited health officials to city streets on a scale not seen since the start of the pandemic. Take a look. China reported 5,280 new COVID cases today, more than double the previous day's tally, as the highly transmissible Omicron variant spreads across a country that has tethered tightly to a zero COVID strategy. Now that approach, which pivots on hard localized lockdowns and has left China virtually cut off from the outside world for 2 years, appears to be on the line as Omicron finds its way into communities. At least 13 cities nationwide were fully locked down on Tuesday. Several other cities had partial lockdowns. Dozens of domestic flights at airports in Beijing and Shanghai were also canceled Tuesday morning. That is according to flight tracking data. An outbreak at Volkswagen Group factories in the Jilin city of Changchun also prompted 3 sites to shut on Monday for at least 3 days, according to a spokesman. Top Chinese medical expert Zhang Wenhong has raised the prospect of softening the zero COVID strategy in the face of the Omicron variant, but he also warned any relaxation of mass testing and lockdowns was impossible in the short term. MMDA General Manager and Undersecretary Frisco San Juan Jr. said all local governments of the 17 cities and municipalities in the National Capital Region are ready for the possible shift to Alert Level 0 as COVID cases continue to fall. In a Laging Handa briefing, the official said NCR mayors have not made a recommendation for a shift to Alert Level 0, but they are ready for such a scenario.
Wala po namang nagsabi ng kanilang posisyon. Ang napag-usapan lang po ay handa silang lahat.
Now, NCR and most parts of the country are under Alert Level 1 until March 15. Earlier, Health Secretary Francisco Duque III said that the IATF and other health experts would discuss the guidelines for a possible Alert Level 0, which could end most of the health emergency restrictions introduced during the pandemic. Meanwhile, Metro Manila, along with 47 other areas in several parts of the country, will remain under Alert Level 1 until the end of the month, that according to Malacanang today. Now, this after the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases approved the new alert level classifications in the country. That according to Acting Presidential Spokesperson and Communications Secretary Martin Andanar in a press statement. Only Metro Manila and 39 other areas have been placed under the most lenient Alert Level 1 for the first half of March. The provinces of Nueva Ecija, Zambales, and Batangas, as well as the cities of Lucena, Cebu, or Moc, Tacloban and Butuan have been added to the roster of places in the country where Alert Level 1 will be implemented from March 16 to the 31st. Under Alert Level 1, movement of persons regardless of age and comorbidities is allowed, but with restrictions on crowded and closed spaces and close contact settings, or 3Cs. The operations of private establishments and government agencies are likewise allowed at full on-site capacity, subject to minimum public health standards. The IATF EID is also still requiring the wearing of well-fitted face masks, except when eating and drinking, participating in team and individual sports in venues where ventilation standards can be maintained, and practicing outdoor sports or exercise activities where physical distance can still be observed. Meanwhile, France has dropped the need for a vaccine pass to enter public spaces, such as cinemas, restaurants, while masks are now only required on public transport and no longer at work or in school. Take a look.
On respire, c'est vraiment un grand plaisir, on se retrouve effectivement comme avant, puis on échange, il y a plus que avant il y avait le regard, c'est tout, et là ça y est, on devine les sourires, c'est vrai qu'on a beaucoup plus de plaisir en fait à revenir et à échanger avec les autres.
Bonjour. France is also offering a fourth dose of a coronavirus vaccine to people older than 80 who had their booster more than 3 months ago, according to the Prime Minister. The European nation on Monday also dropped the vaccine pass, proof that someone has been triple vaccinated against the illness, which until now was required to enter public spaces such as cinemas or restaurants. A similar pass will, however, be needed to go to a hospital or a retirement home in order to protect the most vulnerable. And former U.S. President Barack Obama had tested positive for a mild case of COVID-19. The former U.S. president said on his Twitter account on Sunday, "I've had a scratchy throat for a couple of days, but I am feeling fine otherwise," Obama tweeted, adding that his wife, former First Lady Michelle Obama, has so far tested negative. "Michelle and I are grateful to be vaccinated and boosted," he wrote. In August, Obama scaled back his 60th birthday celebrations due to the spread of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. Obama reiterated his support for the vaccine in his tweet Sunday, saying his own positive test was a reminder to get vaccinated if you haven't already, even as cases go down. In other news, police were conducting an urgent manhunt on Monday for a gunman suspected of shooting homeless men on the streets of Washington and New York in a series of cold-blooded attacks. The string of shootings, which took place in the middle of the night over a period of 10 days this month, have left 2 men dead and 3 wounded. Take a look.
We believe that there are at least 5 separate shootings linked to the same suspect. In all cases, the victims were men experiencing homelessness who were sleeping outside. Tragically, 1 person in D.C. died of his injuries, and at least 1 person in New York City has died.
Homelessness should not be a homicide. This was a cold-blooded attack. When you look at the premeditative action of this shooter, it sends a clear and loud message that we need the help from the public. Someone knows this person. We're asking for the public to find him. We don't want to lose another resident in this city, in New York, or anywhere else. This person is carrying out a premeditative act of shooting innocent people.
Now, Mayor Bowser also said a $70,000 reward had been offered for information leading to the arrest. $25,000 by the Washington police, $25,000 by the New York police, and $20,000 by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Now, police released multiple pictures, as you can see here, and surveillance video of the suspect, a shaven-headed and bearded man dressed all in black. And police said the first two shootings took place in Northeast Washington on March 3 and 8. Both victims suffered non-life-threatening injuries. On March 9, a homeless man was found dead in Northeast Washington with stab and gunshot wounds, according to police. His tent had been set on fire. New York's homeless population has grown in recent years, and Mayor Adams announced a plan just weeks after taking office in January to move them out of the city's vast subway system, where many sleep on frigid nights. In other news, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced that his government is preparing the country's ports to host nuclear-powered submarines from Britain and the United States. Take a look.
To that end, I announced that the government has directed Defence to commence their studies into what infrastructure and services are needed right here in the West to support the more frequent presence of United States and United Kingdom nuclear-powered submarines right here in Western Australia. We expect, as possible, the ability of US and UK nuclear-powered submarines to be here on the West Coast, and ultimately we'd like to see them on the East Coast as well, is all part of what our plan is as we continue to push forward our AUKUS partnership.
Now, the move could provide the two nuclear powers with better access to the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific, challenging China's growing maritime power. Prime Minister Morrison said the decision was part of the AUKUS partnership, referring to the defense agreement inked last year between the US, the UK, and Australia. And under AUKUS, Australia will become the first non-nuclear country to have nuclear-powered submarines. Prime Minister Morrison said the U.S. and British nuclear-powered submarines would initially be hosted at Australia's remote west coast on the Indian Ocean, but added that he would ultimately like to see them on the east coast as well. Ahead of a looming federal election, Prime Minister Morrison has flagged a number of expansions of Australia's defense capability, including boosting the country's defense forces by a third to 80,000 personnel by 2040. Britain's unemployment rate has fallen below its pre-pandemic level, according to data on Tuesday, but wages are eroding at the fastest pace in 8 years as inflation soars. The UK unemployment rate dropped to 3.9% in the 3 months to the end of January, from 4.1% in the final quarter of last year, returning to pre-coronavirus pandemic levels, according to the Office for National Statistics. Now, welcoming news that the number of unemployed fell to around 1.34 million people, according to Finance Minister Rishi Sunak, added that he was confident the labor market was in a good position to deal with the current global challenges. There are worries that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, soaring global inflation, and renewed COVID lockdowns in China will hamper the world's economic recovery. The ONS added that the number of UK workers on payrolls jumped 275,000 to a record high 29.7 million in February. And Asian markets fell today, with Hong Kong tech firms leading another collapse in the city's Hang Seng Index following the COVID shutdown of tech hub Shenzhen and worries about Russia's military outreach to China. Concerns about China's economic outlook saw oil prices suffer fresh selling pressure, with the West with the WTI falling back below $100 a week after it hit a 14-year high on the back of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Hopes for progress in talks to bring an end to the war in Eastern Europe were also putting pressure on the black gold. Global markets have been in a spiral since Russian troops marched into the neighboring country, leading international powers to impose crippling sanctions on the country and numerous companies to pull out. Among the hardest hit markets has been Hong Kong, which was already under pressure from China's regulatory crackdown on tech firms as part of the government's move to tighten its grip on the economy. News that U.S. authorities were also looking to crack the whip over Chinese firms listed in New York sparked a rout last week. And the selling continued Monday after news emerged of the Shenzhen lockdown. The Hang Seng Index dived Monday as the Hang Seng Tech Index was pummeled 11% after China said it would lock down Shenzhen to contain an outbreak. Russia has introduced restrictions on the export of grains, of which it is a major supplier, to 4 former Soviet countries to secure domestic supplies and avoid a spike in prices. Russia is introducing a temporary ban on the exportation of grains to the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. According to the government's press service in a statement late on Monday, the EEU is a Moscow-led trade club of ex-Soviet republics, which includes Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia. The Russian government also said it would stop exports of white and raw cane sugar to third countries. The restrictions on grains exports expire on June 30. And those on sugar on August 31, according to the government, adding that the decision was taken to protect the domestic food market given the situation of external restrictions. Western nations have imposed a spate of sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine that make it difficult to import goods into the country. And German cybersecurity agency BSI on Tuesday urged consumers not to use antivirus software made by Russia's Kaspersky, warning the firm could be implicated in hacking assaults amid Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia's military and intelligence activities in Ukraine and its threats to EU and NATO allies, particularly Germany, mean there is a considerable risk of a successful IT attack, according to the Federal Cybersecurity Authority in a statement. A Russian IT manufacturer can itself carry out offensive operations, can be forced to attack target systems against its will, or be itself spied on as a victim of a cyber operation without its knowledge, or be misused as a tool for attacks against its own customers, the agency warned. Companies and operators of critical infrastructure are particularly vulnerable, but individuals could also be hit, according to the BSI, inviting anyone in doubt to contact it for advice. The U.S. banned government agencies from using Kaspersky software as early as 2017. Kaspersky has always rejected accusations that it works with the Kremlin, but its business, WSA, badly hit by the U.S. ban, which came into effect at a time when the company's software was installed on hundreds of millions of computers worldwide. And we'll be back with more news right after this break. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Mobile Legends!
Karapatan natin lahat na iboto ang karapat-dapat! Tama!
Pilipino pwedeng bumoto?
Kung rehistrado ka.
Ha?
Ang lahat ng Pilipinong rehistrado lamang ang maaaring bumoto. 1 taon ang ibinibigay ng Commission on Elections para magparehistro ang mga Pilipinong boboto sa darating na eleksyon. Kailangan gawin ito para maiwasan ang tinatawag na flying voters. Teka, lahat ba kayo nagparehistro na?
Opo, rehistrado na kami lahat.
Bakit tahimik ka? Hindi ka nakapagrehistro, no?
Nakakalimutan ko.
Ay, hindi ka pwedeng bumoto. Mabuti pa, bumili ka na lang ng balot.
Pagka kami pa bumili ng balot, pwede na kami bumoto.
Hindi, pero mabubusog ka. Para sa karagdagang kaalaman, makipag-ugnayan lang sa pinakamalapit na barangay o bisitahin ang COMELEC website.
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Now, Moroccan police intervened at the Moulay Abdallah Stadium to stop the Ultras fans of Asfar beaten 2-0, who invaded the pitch to face down the supporters of Maghreb de Fez, or MAS, at the end of a Throne Cup game in Rabat. Around 160 people, some carrying knives and stones, were arrested after the violence left more than 100 police officers injured. The violence erupted at the end of a Throne Cup game between Asfar, the Moroccan Armed Forces club based in Rabat, and Maghreb de Fez. Asfar were beaten 2-0, and their ultra fans invaded the pitch to face down rival supporters, according to local media. Now, police were bombarded with projectiles as they intervened. The DGSN reported 103 police injured, while 57 supporters were also hurt. The Moroccan Football Federation will meet next week to discuss the violence, and sanctions are expected. Sunday's outbreak of trouble was the first since fans were allowed to return to sports grounds at the end of February after 2 years of closure due to the pandemic. However, Moroccan stadiums have been the scene of violence between supporters in recent years. Now, people attended an immersive exhibition dedicated to Ukrainian artist, poet, and philosopher Taras Shevchenko in Toronto. Take a look.
Every generation finds something new, something that resonates with this particular time. And today, the poetry and art of Shevchenko again calls for fight for your own freedom. You know, Ukrainian language did not exist, literary language did not exist at that time. And Shevchenko wrote in Ukrainian. He was from Ukraine, he knew how people spoke, and he knew and he felt all this value and significance and importance of the language to be preserved, and he wrote in Ukrainian.
This exhibition, Immersive Shevchenko, Ukrainian Soul, will definitely let you understand or even feel why freedom, fight for freedom is on our DNA.
Shevchenko is part of the Ukrainian soul, which always resists any kind of repression. So Ukrainian culture is a very strong culture as well as very democratic.
Now, according to artnet.com, Andriy Bukic, a Ukrainian diplomat stationed in Canada, now he said the Shevchenko experience was an opportunity to introduce North American audiences to the culture of his homeland. The site also said the experience was first opened to the public in the port city of Odessa last year in a design managed by Lighthouse immersive producer Valery Kostyuk in coordination with a team of Ukraine-based curators and consultants. Proceeds from Immersive Shevchenko will be distributed to the Red Cross and the National Bank of Ukraine Fund. And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angela. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.